Welcome back, everybody. It's Paul Auster's In the Country of Last Things.
Oh yeah, this one's a real head trip. It's not your typical end of the world story.
Right, like there's no zombies or anything like that. It's just this feeling of everything falling apart, you know?
Exactly. And Auster just drops us right into it. This nameless city, totally decaying, no backstory or anything.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we were looking at a bunch of different sources, excerpts from the book and some essays, and they all kind of point to how that vagueness, that lack of context actually makes the story even more powerful.
Because it becomes about our anxieties, right?
I mean,
It's like he's holding up a mirror, all our fears about the environment,
Yeah.
society, like everything just sort of collapsing.
yeah, it starts to feel a little too real.
Oh, absolutely. Especially these days.
And you'd think a book set in a world like that would be just pure doom and gloom, but that's not what Auster does. He actually weaves in this thread of hope throughout the story.
Which is what makes it so brilliant, right? He's not just focused on survival. It's about what it means to be human, even when everything's falling apart.
Exactly. It's about finding meaning in the chaos and
he does that through Anna Blume.
yeah.
She's the main character, and she's on this journey to find her brother. But it becomes so much more than that.
I was going to say, that's such a brilliant part of the book, right? On the surface, it's just this simple search, but then it becomes this whole metaphor for like searching for meaning in a world that's lost all meaning.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's like, even when everything's crumbling around us, that human need for connection, that need for something to believe in, it never really goes away.
And the way Auster portrays that connection in this setting is just amazing. There's this one scene I keep thinking about. It's early on in the book where Anna meets this group of people. They're huddled around a fire and they're sharing stories.
Oh yeah, I remember that scene. It's like for a moment the world outside just disappears, and all that matters is that shared humanity, that connection.
It's so powerful, and it kind of shows how hope can exist even in the smallest moments.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be this big grand thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just about those little sparks of connection.
And speaking of those small moments, one of the things that really drew me into this book was Auster's writing style. It's so poetic and precise.
Yeah.
You know?
It's interesting how he does that, though,
Yeah.
because he uses these really short sentences, almost like fragments, and it's like they mirror the brokenness of the world he's created.
But there's still this underlying beauty to his prose.
Right. There's this one passage where Anna describes this city as a skeleton of his former self, and it's such a haunting image. But then he talks about this single flower pushing through a crack in the pavement.
It's like he's always reminding us that even in the darkest places, there are still these glimmers of hope, little bits of resilience that refuse to be extinguished.
And it's not just in the imagery, right? The way he structures the whole narrative through Anna's letters to this unknown person creates this incredible sense of intimacy. Like we're right there with her, experiencing everything.
That's so true. It's like we're reading her diary or something.
Yeah.
It makes those big questions about humanity and meaning feel so much more personal and relatable.
Absolutely. It's not just some abstract philosophical debate.
Yeah.
It's grounded in her experience, you know? And that makes it all the more powerful.
Okay, so we've talked about the setting the themes and Auster's incredible writing style, but there's one more element I think we need to discuss before we wrap up this first part of our deep dive.
Let me guess. You're talking about that ending.
Yeah, that ending, it just leaves you with so many questions.
It's almost like Auster is refusing to give us any easy answers, which is kind of brilliant when you think about it.
It is. He's forcing us to sit with the ambiguity, to grapple with the fact that maybe there aren't any clear solutions in a world like this.
And I think that's a really important challenge, especially given how much we've come to care about Anna and what happens to her.
Right, it's not just about wanting a tidy ending. It's about being forced to confront the reality of this world and how we would navigate it.
Which brings us to the heart of what makes In the Country of Last Things so compelling. It's not just a dystopian novel. It's a reflection on what it means to be human, what sustains us in times of crisis. How do we find hope when everything seems lost?
And honestly, those are questions that feel more relevant than ever.
Yeah, I mean, look at the world around us. Climate change, societal divisions. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by it all.
You're right. And while Auster doesn't give us any simple answers, he does offer us something incredibly valuable. He forces us to confront those anxieties, to really grapple with the darkness, and to recognize that even in the face of despair, the human spirit is capable of incredible resilience.
You know what really gets me about this book? It's how Auster uses the city, like the actual physical decay of the city, to reflect what's happening to the people.
Oh yeah, it's like the crumbling buildings and the lack of resources. They become metaphors for the characters' internal struggle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Auster doesn't sugarcoat anything. He shows us how that kind of environment really messes with people.
Sure.
Some give up completely, they become violent or just apathetic.
Yeah.
But others, like Anna, they're fighting to hold on to their humanity, even if it means clinging to the tiniest bit of hope.
And I think that's what sets this book apart from other dystopian stories. It's not just about surviving, it's about what it means to stay human in a world that's lost its humanity.
Right. It makes you think about those tough choices, those moral compromises, like how far would you go to survive? When do you start sacrificing your values just to stay alive? Auster doesn't give us any easy answers.
Yeah, he really makes you think about those gray areas. Like take Sam Farbar, for example.
Yeah.
He runs this underground newspaper and he's committed to the truth, but he also has to make these really difficult decisions about what to publish, how to protect his sources.
Oh yeah, Sam's a great example of that moral complexity. He's trying to do the right thing, but the system is so corrupt that he's constantly being forced to compromise.
It's something we can all relate to on some level, right? Even if we're not facing life or death situations, we all make compromises in our lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But Auster takes it to this whole other level.
Yeah.
It's like he's pushing us to confront the limits of our own ethics.
Yeah, it's unsettling, but it definitely makes you think.
Well, that's the power of the novel, right?
Right.
It doesn't tie everything up in a neat little bow.
Mm-hmm.
It leaves you with this feeling that navigating a world like that takes constant awareness and a willingness to adapt. And you got to have the guts to stick to your values, even when everything around you is telling you to let go.
You know, in the middle of all this bleakness, I was struck by how the characters are still searching for meaning. Like, even with everything falling apart, they're still trying to make sense of it all, to find something to believe in.
It's like that basic human need never goes away. Even in the face of unimaginable suffering, we still crave purpose, something to anchor us.
It's like the objects lesson in the book, you know, where people spend all their time categorizing these everyday objects.
Oh yeah, I remember that. It seems so pointless at first,
Mm-hmm.
but it becomes this act of defiance against the chaos.
It's like they're trying to impose order on a world that's completely lost its order.
And it's not just about order, right? It's about remembering, preserving a connection to the past.
And that's such a crucial part of Auster's message. He's not just warning us about the dangers of collapse. He's reminding us about the importance of our stories, our history, our shared humanity. That's what keeps us going.
Yeah, those are the things that sustain us.
Mhm.
And it's through those stories, through our connections to the past and to each other, that we find the strength to keep going, even when there's nothing left to hope for.
Earlier, we were talking about Auster's use of language, and one thing that keeps coming back to me is how he captures the fragility of human connection. You know how precious those moments become in this desolate world?
Oh, absolutely. Like that scene where Anna shares a meal with those strangers.
Yes. It's such a simple thing, but it's described with so much tenderness. You almost forget about the bleakness around them.
It's like those moments of connection, those shared experiences. They become these little beacons of hope.
Exactly. They remind us that even when things are really bad, that impulse to connect, to care for each other, it doesn't disappear.
It's like a testament to the power of empathy, compassion.
Mm.
Even in the most awful situations, people still find ways to be kind to each other.
And it's not always about grand gestures. It's the little things. A shared meal, a kind word, a moment of just listening. That's what makes a difference.
And that's something Auster really gets across in this book. It's those small acts of human connection, those moments of vulnerability and resilience. That's how we survive, not just physically, but emotionally too.
It's like he's saying hope isn't this big abstract thing. It's in those everyday connections. We find it in each other.
Which is such a powerful message, especially these days when everything feels so divided, so disconnected. It reminds us that even when it feels like everything's falling apart, we still have each other.
And that's probably the most hopeful message of all. That even in the face of an apocalypse, human connection endures. And in that connection, there's the possibility for resilience, for rebuilding, for finding a way forward. We've talked a lot about the darkness in this book, the despair. But I think it's important to remember that In the Country of Last Things is not just some depressing dystopian story. It's actually a story about hope, about how strong the human spirit can be.
And that's why it still feels so relevant, even though it was written a while ago.
All right.
Because even though the world Auster created is fictional, the feelings he explores, the questions he asks, they're timeless.
Totally. It's like he's tapping into something essential about being human, you know? Our ability to experience incredible pain, but also incredible resilience. And I think we see that reflected in Anna's journey.
Oh, absolutely. She goes through so much loss, so much hardship. You can feel the temptation to just give up. But then she finds these moments of beauty and connection, even joy, in the midst of all the destruction. It's like she embodies that balance between fragility and strength. That's what makes us human.
And you know what amazes me about Anna? It's that even surrounded by all this suffering, she never loses her empathy. There's that scene where she meets those kids who lost their parents and they're just trying to survive on their own. Her response is just so human, so full of compassion.
That's such a powerful scene.
Mm.
And it goes back to what we were talking about before,
Yeah.
that human connection. Even when everything's falling apart, Anna finds a way to reach out to those kids to comfort them. And in doing so, she kind of reaffirms her own humanity.
It's like one of the biggest messages Auster's trying to get across. Even when everything's going wrong, we still have the power to choose kindness, to choose compassion, to choose connection.
And those choices, those little acts of humanity, they spread outwards. They create this sense of hope and community that can push back against the darkness.
We talked about the ending earlier, how it's left open, and I think that ambiguity is one of the most brilliant things about this book.
Oh, for sure. It forces us to confront the fact that sometimes there aren't easy answers, Life is messy and complicated, and that's true even in a dystopian world.
Exactly. We're left wondering what happens to Anna, what happens to everyone. And that makes us think, what would we do in that situation? What choices would we make?
It's like a call to action almost. Auster isn't just showing us a dystopia. He's challenging us to imagine a better future, to figure out what's truly important to us, and to think about how we would act if we were faced with these kinds of challenges.
And that's what makes In the Country of Last Things so much more than just a story about the end of the world. It's a story about the strength of the human spirit, our ability to find hope even when things seem hopeless. And it reminds us that connection with each other, that's what helps us get through the tough times.
It's like Auster saying, even in an apocalypse, there's still beauty, there's still love, there's still meaning. And that's something worth fighting for.
That's a great note to end on. So as we wrap up our deep dive into In the Country of Last Things, I want to leave you with this question. What would you hold on to in a world where hope seems lost? What values would guide you? And how would you find those connections, those moments of human connection that help us make it through even the darkest times? Thanks for joining us on this journey into Paul Auster's world.